Hi, I'm Jeremy, and today I'm going to show you how I made this knife maker's vise. So I got this metal from a local, out of the scrap bin out of a local steel supplier, and it comes, usually you buy steel like this and it comes with a bunch of oil all over it. So just cleaning it off, make it a little easier, cleaner to work with, and now I'm doing some layout, figuring out where I need to cut the pieces. Nothing precise here, just kind of get an idea of how long I think it ought to be. I want this to be able to do up to a 9-inch blade. Although I think I made it a little longer. I think I made it to where we do 11-inch blade, but you know, some chef's knives got 9-inch blades, so that's kind of where I was going for that. And then I'm just cutting it. Got this Harbor Freight Porta Band here. Seems I like it. It seems to work pretty good. I was doing it with this kind of project I was doing with angle grinders before, so it's nice to have this cleaner, quicker. But it's now I got that cut out. Now I want to put a cap on the end of this, and so when I weld that pipe to the tubing, the square, rectangular tubing, I'll have that little plate I'm about to cut out is going in between the cap for the end of the tubing. So that's what I'm doing here. Just cutting this out, and then once I get it cut out, I'll grind it with the belt grinder and get her to fit pretty decent. I want her to have kind of a lip all the way around the cap on the tubing, so I wouldn't have to grind any chamfers. I was planning on grinding it smooth, so I didn't want to grind off all the weld metal. Kind of hard to see there, but you can see there was a little bit of a step. So here I'm at the belt grinder, just finishing that part up, get it the size that I want it to be, and pretty happy with that fit. So just gonna take the tube, the rectangular tubing, and the pipe to the grinder and kind of squaring this up a little bit. It's not perfectly square when I'm done with it, but it's more square, and tack on the plate there square, and then I'll have a square joint in between the two. So this is gonna end up going in the vise. This vise will go in the bench vise, and so it doesn't really have to be all that straight or square, but just kind of get it ready to weld there basically is what I'm doing. So now this plate's going to go in the middle, so I'm just trying to get that kind of centered up, and I am going to clamp these together, and what I want to be able to do is drill through, have that in where I want it to be in the middle, on top, and then I'll drill through both of them at the same time. That way I know the holes are going to line up. So I get that kind of, it, you know, is obviously off to the one side, but it's centered widthwise in that tube, and now I'm just doing some layout. Find the center, figure out where I want the holes to be. Once I get that figured out, got a couple of these little spring-loaded center punch deals, and center punch the holes, and then I'm going to take them to the drill press and drill them out. So that's what I'm doing here. This starting out with a smaller pilot bit, pilot drill, and drill that out, and then I'll move to the size I actually want to drill. Just put a little divot in there, and then go in with some oil. I'm using just a 3-in-1 or 4-in-1 all-purpose oil for my cutting fluid. It seems to work okay. Usually when I have problems with drill bits, it's because I'm breaking them, not because they're getting super dull. I get lazy and I don't clamp things down, and then the drill will pick it up and it'll get an angle and snap the bit off. That's usually the problem I have with drill bits. So, but anyway, the oil seems to work pretty decent. I don't really like that container that the oil's in, but the oil's fine. So here I'm just, you can see that I took the two pieces apart. I don't need it anymore. I don't need to be clamped anymore because I got the pilot drilled in there, pilot holes drilled in there. And so just now I'm just getting these to the right size. Those two holes are going to be tapped with a 1/4 20. Um, so this drill came with the bit, and you can see what I was talking about there earlier, where it broke the bit. It picked the drill bit, picked it up, and snapped that bit. But luckily the hole was already in and fine. So now what I'm doing here is I'm kind of adjusting the drill press, so I don't have that won't be able to lift that thing up anymore. And then I chuck the tap into the drill press and then screw it in by hand. And the reason I do that is it just keeps my tap straight and square, and which I'm terrible at freehanding that, so I just do it that way. So now I'm doing some pre-assembly, and I just want to make sure everything's gonna fit the way I want it to fit, where everything's working the way it's supposed to. Those two are going to receive springs here pretty soon. As I loosen it, a lot of times when I'll loosen the screws that close the vise, I won't have two hands. One hand will be holding the knife. So I wanted it spring-loaded. I had seen a couple of these similar ones made on YouTube, and I thought the spring-loaded return was a great idea. So just found a spring in my scrap bin, and now here it was too long, so I'm just cutting it basically in half. You can see I didn't measure it or anything, but cut in half, and that seemed pretty close to half. Actually, I was kind of impressed with myself. But now we put springs in and test fit and make sure everything's fitting right and working the way it's supposed to, and it seemed to work just fine. So once I get these in and tested, make sure everything's where I want it to be, then I can take the pieces that are going to be welded together and go do that, go weld them out. And those screws with the wing nuts on them are going to be how you would tighten and loosen the vise once the vise is together. So everything seemed to fit. I knew that those screws that I'm taking out now were too long, but I wanted the smooth shank to be a decent size for 4 springs. And my thought was I would just bury those threads into that metal plate there, and it would hold pretty decent. I think final time I assembled it, I put a little thread locker on, also some Loctite thread locker. So just bring it over the toolbox, going to grab a wrench and tighten those in, so I can trim the ends off. This is kind of a tip for you if you want to trim bolts. If you can trim them and then pull them back through whatever they're going to be threaded into, you'll more easily thread back into it when you got to put it back together later. So threaded them in, then cut them down, and now I am going to start prepping the metal for welding. I'm planning on MIG welding this. I got an old Airco MIG welder, so I'm going to grind all the edges where I want to have the weld beads, and then so that's the square tube with the movable vise, and then the round piece is going to actually fit in the bench vise. So don't really need to bevel very much. What I'm just doing here is cleaning this stuff up and getting it ready for to weld. And this obviously is sped up. Most of my videos so far have been. I didn't realize how slow I was until I watched myself on video, but Uh, there's just, I guess, I think a lot of people probably think they're faster than they actually are, but you're not. So if you're ever curious about that, then videotape yourself and um, watch it back and see how slow you actually are. So anyway, uh, I got everything grounded and I took it over and started welding, and it was not welding very good at all. You could see all that porosity in my weld. So I took it and ground that all out, and then you can see that both ends of that are shiny now too. I ground, well, I sanded down. It was a flap wheel on the grinder at some spots to put my ground clamp. I thought it was a grounding problem. Sometimes the ground doesn't work so good through the mill scale, so I took it back, ground out the bad welds, and then ground spots for. You see, I ground all the way around on there, so I could put the ground clamp as I rotate this thing. Um, and obviously, I'm welding on some sawhorses here. I don't have a welding table, which kind of sucks, but you know, you got to work with what you got. Where I'm standing right there is usually where my lawnmower is parked, so I don't really have room for one yet. And so the welds turned out a lot better this time. Amazing what some ground current some good path to ground will do for your welding. So I got a little shim, and I'm just kind of trying to line up the rectangle tubing with the black iron pipe there, and then I'll tack it together and weld it up. And the end of my MIG whip there keeps getting plugged up full of junk, and what I should do is stop and clean it out, but I don't want to stop to do that. So it gives me a few fits here and there. You'll see is stop and start, or it's the wires wanting to get stuck in that tip, but that's what happens when you don't want to take a couple seconds to stop and clean out your MIG tip. But it's working fine. I made it through this no problem, and there again I got to stop and pull the wire off, and but tack it up, and then I weld it out. This again, I'm just kind of lining it up down the length of that sawhorse to get it straight, but it doesn't need to be perfect. Get that welded up, and then yeah, that's it. It's welded out, and you can see there where I told you earlier I was thinking about grounding those welds, and I wanted to have it beveled, so yeah, that turned out pretty decent. Now what I'm doing here is I'm going to clean this again. I cleaned it earlier in the video, like the oil from the steel yard with a brake cleaner, and now I'm using an oil. I think it's an oil and wax remover, which seems to work pretty good for me before I paint. And then throw a little primer on here, and it's still kind of warm from me welding it, so that this primer is actually going to cure pretty quick. I don't know if you're supposed to do that or not, where you paint while it's still warm, but it seems like it works pretty good for me. So it's all primered up, and then I come back and I'm going to spray on some flat black. I don't paint everything flat black, but things like this, for whatever reason, I think flat black is my go-to choice. I think it looks pretty decent, and you know, if you use flat, then when your welds aren't great and you got to grind them all out like I did, you don't have to put as much effort into sanding those down. So this is kind of a win-win. Looks cool, and you don't have to be as good at putting things together. So here's the final product. It's the knife maker's vise. You can see you can tighten or loosen, put a knife in there, and then the idea is to be able to work on the handle. Sometimes changing the position of the knife really helps when you're contouring scales in the handle, and you can rotate that thing whichever way you want. And that's it. Thanks for watching.